Murder and Mayhem, a Cryptic Cove cozy mystery. Chapters 1 through 5. Chapter 1. 4 weeks ago, Alexis Danforth's life was meticulously planned out. Working as a legal researcher for a prominent lawyer in Boston allowed her to pursue her law degree while honing her skills in the field. It was her father's plan, not hers. The legal field intrigued her, but she couldn't claim it was her dream job. Her father had always made the decisions, and Alexis had never argued. Her parents had taken an early vacation to celebrate their 27th wedding anniversary in some remote jungle. Having the house to herself for the last few weeks of summer vacation had been liberating at first, but loneliness began to creep in. She started questioning her career choice, though telling her father that it wasn't what she wanted would have been unthinkable. The majority of people she encountered in her job were unpleasant. They were rich, powerful men, but still scumbags, and the thought of helping them escape serious charges didn't sit well with her. Then, in the early hours of the morning, fate threw her a curveball. The phone rang at 2 a.m., jolting her awake. "Miss Danforth, this is Inspector." The man's name didn't register, but his next words did. "I regret to inform you that the plane your parents were on has crashed in the jungle. There were no survivors." "What?" Alexis shot up in bed. "Oh my God. Are you sure? They were on flight 131. "Yes, ma'am, we're sure. The plane encountered bad weather during its descent." She lay in bed for hours, sobbing, unable to process the news. When dawn broke, she called her job to inform them she wouldn't be in. "Oh, Alexis, that's awful," the secretary said. "Let me put you through to Dan." Dan Matthews, the top lawyer she worked for, could be stern but wasn't devoid of compassion. Still, as Alexis relayed the tragic news, she sensed something was off. "Is there something else, Mr. Matthews?" she asked cautiously. Dan hesitated. "Alexis, I hate to tell you this now, but I was going to speak with you today. The firm has decided to cut your position. You'll receive severance pay, but we won't need a researcher anymore." She hung up without a word, rolled over, and cried harder than she had all night. In a matter of hours, her entire world had crumbled. As an only child with no other family to turn to, she was truly alone. The estate manager called soon after, insisting she go through the paperwork to tie up her parents' affairs. Feeling lost, Alexis wandered up to the attic, her mother's favorite place. Her mother had always loved spending time up there, reading or sewing. Alexis found herself drawn to her mother's old hat box, a beautifully decorated one with pink Victorian roses and a pink ribbon. Her mother had once called it a treasure box, filled with secrets. At 25, Alexis figured she was long overdue to peek inside. She squatted in front of the box, wedged tightly between other items. With some effort, she managed to free it. Dust covered everything. Her mother had always been meticulous, even about cleaning the attic, but it had clearly been a while since anyone had been up there. Alexis carefully untied the ribbon and opened the box. Among several items, a small notebook caught her eye. Her hands trembled as she flipped through its pages, reading words that shattered her world even further. Her grandmother was alive. At 12, her parents had told her grandmother had passed away. That lie now felt like the final betrayal. She threw the notebook back into the box, anger surging through her. "How could they do this to me?" she screamed to the empty attic. Driven by a need for answers, she spent hours researching online, searching through legal and county records. She couldn't understand why her parents had uprooted them from their hometown, only to lie about her grandmother. It didn't take long for the truth to sink in. Her life, at least half of it, had been built on lies. 2 weeks later, she found herself back in her childhood hometown. Cryptic Cove was a place she barely remembered, having left when she was just 11. The town hadn't changed much, and her grandmother was still there, but her reasons for leaving and staying away were unclear. Grams had mentioned a fight with Alexis's father, but before Alexis could press her for details, she changed the subject. In the days that followed, Alexis wandered the town, lost in her thoughts. She remembered loving the fisherman's wharf as a child. The salty air, the ice cream cones, and the homemade New England fudge were fond memories. The area wasn't a tourist destination, just a place where locals worked and lived. but to her younger self, it had been magical. Sitting on a bench with a chocolate chip ice cream cone, Alexis gazed out at the sea, trying to recapture that sense of wonder. But the magic felt distant. She was no longer that little girl who dreamed of fairy tales and hidden worlds. You'll remember the magic soon enough. Startled, Alexis turned to see her grandmother standing behind her. How did you know I was here? Alexis asked, confused. Grams waved a hand casually. I saw you sitting here. She joined Alexis on the bench. Alexis studied her, still puzzled. Okay, but how did you just read my mind? Her grandmother chuckled. Some people just think really loud, child. Alexis wasn't sure if she believed that. Grams had always seemed to have some kind of special power, knowing things before anyone else did. I don't feel like that little girl anymore, Alexis admitted. This place used to feel magical, but now it's just another spot on the map. Nothing wrong with memories. The magic is still here, waiting for you to find it. Alexis sighed. Peyton says I'm too analytical. She's never left town, so she doesn't know the real world. Grams raised an eyebrow. Don't be so quick to judge what someone else has or hasn't been through. Peyton's a lot smarter than you think. They sat in silence for a moment before Alexis's emotions bubbled to the surface. I'm so mad at Dad for taking us away from here. Why did they lie to me about you? Why? Her voice trailed off, overwhelmed by the unanswered questions. Grams gave her a sympathetic smile. He did what he thought was right. We can't always judge someone for that. Maybe, Alexis muttered, unsure. Be mad for a while and then let it go. Holding on to it won't do you any good. Grams gently rubbed the back of her head, a comforting gesture from Alexis's childhood. Then, without warning, she stood up. I have to get back to the shop. You come by later for a visit. With that, Grams hurried off. When Alexis turned to ask what time she should stop by, her grandmother was already gone, vanished faster than seemed possible. Only a pink flower on the bench beside her gave any indication that she'd been there at all. Grams's favorite flower. Maybe Alexis hadn't returned to Cryptic Cove to take care of her grandmother? Maybe she was here to find herself again. Over the next week, Alexis spent more time with her grandmother, trying to make sense of her past. She eventually decided to drop her law classes and stay in town. Grams helped her find a job as the secretary for the town constable, a far cry from the high-pressure world of Boston law. On her second day on the job, Alexis spotted a handsome man across the street, tall with dark hair and a charming smile. He held the door open for others at the cafe, and Alexis couldn't help but notice how gentlemanly he seemed. The phone rang, pulling her out of her thoughts. Constable's office. How can I help you? She answered. Is this John's place? An elderly woman's voice asked. Yes, ma'am. Good. I thought I had the wrong number. Are you new? Yes, ma'am. This is my second day. And who are you, dear? I'm Velda Wheeler's granddaughter, Alexis replied, knowing that her own name didn't mean much to these people. Oh, little Lexi, the woman screeched in delight. So glad to have you back. Alexis rolled her eyes, amused by the small-town familiarity. It was sweet, but also overwhelming at times. After taking the message for John, Alexis put the phone down just as the constable walked in, cheerful as ever. John Ballard wasn't exactly dealing with high-profile cases, but he took his job seriously. By the end of her first week, Alexis realized that life in Cryptic Cove might not be what she expected, but it wasn't without its charms. As she settled into her new routine, the pain of losing her parents began to fade, replaced by the slow realization that maybe, just maybe, this small town held the key to finding herself again. And she would start with her childhood name, Lexi. Chapter 2. Monday of the second week started off fairly normal for Lexi Danforth. The town of Cryptic Cove was bustling as people got back to work after a relaxing weekend. By 10 in the morning, she had already fielded 6 phone calls from local business owners, most of them catching up on weekend gossip. Lexi found it amusing, though she could see why John, the town constable, had wanted help. It was hard to get any work done with half the day spent holding a phone to his ear. Lexi had just settled in for her mid-morning donut when the office door burst open, and her grandmother Velda rushed inside. Out of breath and frazzled, Grams was clearly upset. Lexi quickly got up, guiding her to the overstuffed chair by the window. "What's wrong, Grams? You look like you've seen a ghost?" Lexi asked with concern. "Ernest and Wilma Swanson," Velda gasped between breaths, "are missing." Lexi's ears perked up. It wasn't nice to think someone was missing, but she couldn't help the excitement that stirred inside her. "How do you know this?" "I can't find them anywhere. They're just gone," Velda exclaimed. John Ballard, hearing the commotion, emerged from his office. His usual jovial demeanor shifted as he approached, sensing something serious. He gently placed a hand on Velda's shoulder, and she seemed to relax almost instantly. "Oh, John," she said, her voice quivering. "They're gone. I just know it." "Who's gone?" John asked. "The Swansons. I can't find them anywhere." John gave Velda a calm look. "Now, Velda, you know how they are. They probably took the Saturday bus into the city and just haven't returned yet," he said, glancing at Lexi for agreement. Lexi bit her bottom lip, trying to suppress her doubt. "Yeah, Grams, I'm sure they just went into the city." Velda, however, wasn't convinced. She crinkled her nose and shot John a look. "You know better than that. They were meeting me this morning and they never miss a meeting. Besides, the whole town would be talking about their trip if that had happened." John sighed, realizing Velda had a point. In a town as small as Cryptic Cove, even the smallest details of anyone's life were newsworthy. If the Swansons had gone to the city, the gossip mill would have churned that out long before now. "Don't worry, Velda," John said softly, rubbing her shoulder. "When did you see them last?" "Friday night at the bridge game," Velda recalled. "It was late, so I offered to drive them home. They walked toward their door and I left. But now, I don't know if I saw them go inside." John gave her a reassuring nod. "Lexi and I will look into it. I'll take you home and we'll figure it out from there," he said, then turned to Lexi. "Can you call the bus station and ask if they took the bus over the weekend? I'll check in with you once I've seen your grandmother home." Lexi nodded. "Sure, I'll get right on it." As John escorted Velda out the door, Lexi could see the concern etched on his face. This was no ordinary small-town gossip, and it was clear he wasn't thrilled about what it could mean. As she watched them leave, Lexi's thoughts drifted back to her childhood. The only other time she could remember the town being on edge like this was when her Aunt Agatha had disappeared nearly 30 years ago. Shaking off the uneasy feeling, Lexi picked up the phone and called the old man who ran the bus station. He assured her that the Swansons hadn't taken a trip in 2 months. With that lead going nowhere, she decided to call her childhood best friend, Peyton Lewis, to share the news. Since Lexi's return to Cryptic Cove, their friendship had rekindled quickly, as though no time had passed. After chatting with Peyton, the phone rang again, and again. In the span of 30 minutes, Lexi fielded 4 more calls, all from people who had already heard about the Swansons' disappearance. The town didn't need a newspaper. The gossip chain worked faster than any print. Old Man Jordan, who did run the daily paper, was the second person to call, hoping for a scoop for his next edition. Other callers had wilder theories. One suggested the Swansons had walked off the cliff, while another hinted at alien abduction. Apparently, aliens had visited Cryptic Cove before, though Lexi was unclear on the details. John returned to the office about 30 minutes later, looking more concerned than before. He sat across from Lexi, rubbing his chin in thought. "Any luck finding out anything?" he asked, though his tone made it clear he didn't expect much. Lexi shook her head. "Number the bus station hasn't seen them, and I don't know where else to start." John sighed. "Your grandmother's as stubborn as ever. She refused to go home and insisted on going to her shop instead." Lexi smiled slightly. "Yeah, that sounds like Grams. She's convinced the town would fall apart if she wasn't working." John chuckled, though his expression remained troubled. "This is going to stir up a lot of old memories for the town. You realize that, right?" Lexi nodded, catching his drift. "You mean Aunt Agatha?" John leaned back in his chair. I was part of the volunteer search and rescue team back then. We combed the woods for days, but we never found a trace of her. Who led the investigation? Lexi asked. Some old county investigator. He's long gone now, John replied, his brow furrowing. You don't think the two cases are related, do you? Lexi hesitated. Probably not, but it might help to look at the old case file. Maybe it could give us some ideas. John pondered that for a moment, then nodded. You're right. I'll head over to Washburn and see what I can find. In the meantime, could you run an errand for me? Sure. What do you need? Head up to Hayden's Ridge and let Bernie Copeland know 2 of his tenants are missing. It's only right to keep him informed. Got it, Lexi agreed, grabbing her keys as John left the office. Locking the door behind her, Lexi set off for the retirement village, wondering just what kind of mystery she had landed in, and whether it would lead her down the same path as Aunt Agatha's disappearance all those years ago. Chapter 3. Lexi hadn't expected John to send her to Hayden's Ridge Retirement Village, but he had insisted, claiming the owner, Bernie Copeland, could be a spiteful old codger when things didn't go his way. John figured it'd be best to send a cute young lady, as he had put it. Lexi, still adjusting to her new life in Cryptic Cove, decided to play it safe. She'd pose as a concerned citizen, delivering the news and ask a few basic questions to get started. The drive to Hayden's Ridge was pleasant, with a hint of early fall in the air. Lexi mentally prepared herself, but the closer she got, the more apprehensive she became. Stay calm, Lexi, she told herself. It was odd being called by her childhood nickname again. No one in town seemed to care when she tried to correct them to use her full name, Alexis. At this point, she was beginning to embrace it. Lexi represented a new, uncertain chapter, far from the rigid, planned-out life of Alexis, the legal researcher. Hayden's Ridge was perched on a hillside, and as she neared, Lexi spotted the ornate wrought-iron gate and brick columns marking the entrance. Beyond the gate lay a picturesque village, complete with quaint bungalows and cottages, set atop a cliff with an ocean view. The office, a grand mansion at the end of a circle drive, served as the community center, game room, and apartments for the elderly. Lexi couldn't help but wonder about the cost of living in such an upscale place. It was clearly for those with money, a thought she tucked away to mention to John. Sometimes a money trail was the easiest thing to follow in an investigation, though she wasn't sure this was even a case yet. Still, a gnawing feeling in her gut told her something wasn't right about the Swansons' disappearance. After checking in at the front desk, Lexi waited in the sitting area for over half an hour. The secretary assured her it would only be a few minutes, but the woman's constant glances between fielding phone calls made Lexi uneasy. It was as if the secretary wanted to say something but was holding back. Lexi was about to start questioning her when Bernie Copeland finally opened his office door and invited her inside. Have a seat. Bernie gestured toward an overstuffed chair across from his desk. Lexi introduced herself as she sat down. What can I do for such a lovely young woman? Bernie asked with a smile as he settled into his leather chair behind the desk. Are you looking for a place for a loved one? We have some beautiful homes here in the village. Lexi got straight to the point. Mr. Copeland? Call me Bernie, he interrupted with a wink. Bernie? Lexi continued, though it felt awkward. I'm here to ask a few questions about the Swansons. The Swansons? He seemed momentarily puzzled, his mind searching to place the names. Oh yes, Ernest and his wife. Velma? Wilma. Lexi corrected gently. Right, Wilma. What kind of information are you looking for? You know I'm under strict confidentiality laws, he added with a sly smile. Lexi's interest piqued. Confidentiality laws? It made her wonder if he had something to hide. Yes, I understand, but they seem to be missing. Missing? Bernie scoffed, brushing it off. They've probably gone off on holiday. Our retirees like to travel. They're free to come and go as they please. We thought of that, Lexi said, maintaining her composure. But there's no record of them leaving town. Did they mention any plans to you or to their neighbors? Is there any reason they might disappear? Bernie's face hardened, his smile vanishing. The charm Lexi had hoped might help clearly wasn't working. Mentioning a disappearance had soured the mood. Our tenants are not prisoners here, Bernie said sharply. They can do as they like. It's not my job to track their every move. John had warned her that Bernie might not take kindly to losing 2 residents, but Lexi had expected at least some concern. Instead, Bernie seemed indifferent. When Lexi asked if they could access the Swansons' residence, his curt reply was, "Court order." Lexi left the office feeling frustrated. Bernie Copeland clearly wasn't going to be cooperative, and his lack of interest in the missing couple only made her more suspicious. She climbed into her car, grabbed her notepad, and jotted down a few thoughts. There were more questions than answers swirling in her mind. She sighed, ready to start the car when the door to the retirement center opened. Lexi watched as Bernie, visibly irritated, strode out and headed toward his car. His hurried, agitated manner set off alarm bells in her mind. Should she follow him? Her instincts told her yes, something was off about this whole situation, and Bernie might be the key to finding out what really happened to the Swansons. Chapter 4. The quiet little town of Cryptic Cove had been disrupted overnight. Lexi Danforth, in desperate need of a calm evening, invited her best friend Peyton Lewis over, along with Peyton's daughter Paisley. They sat on Lexi's back deck, enjoying pizza and wine, while Paisley fed carrots to the rabbits that had come up to the yard. The 9-year-old was exceptionally bright, and despite Peyton becoming a mother at 16, she had done an amazing job raising her daughter. Watching the rabbits approach Paisley, Lexi couldn't help but think about how strange the town could be. Charming and filled with lovely people, it still held a mysterious undertone. The sudden disappearance of an old couple only added to that sense of unease. The next morning, as soon as Lexi stepped into the constable's office, the gossip mill was already buzzing. She had needed the peaceful night, but after hearing everyone's theories, she wished she had a whole weekend to unwind. Lexi couldn't help but wonder if she'd made the right decision by quitting law school and moving back to Cryptic Cove. She wasn't cut out for solving mysteries. Legal paperwork was more her speed, though she hated to admit it. One of the usual callers that morning mentioned that Lexi should check the insurance trail. They had seen something similar on a popular television show the night before and figured it might be a good lead. They also made sure to note that the new insurance agent in town, Jake Donovan, was the nephew of Bernie Copeland, the owner of Hayden's Ridge Retirement Village. Jake had only been in town for a few months. That last bit stuck with Lexi after she hung up. She needed to escape the constant phone calls, and the insurance agency seemed like a good place to start. After letting John know her plan, she headed out the door. When Lexi arrived at the insurance office, the receptionist quickly ushered her in to see Mr. Donovan. Lexi thanked her and stepped into the office, expecting to meet an older man, given Bernie Copeland's age. But instead, she found herself face to face with Mr. Hottie from the diner. Her heart skipped a beat, and she was sure she'd just had a hot flash. At least now she had a name for him, and he wasn't a tourist. She could let Peyton know that little detail. Standing frozen in the doorway, Lexi stared at him, her mouth slightly agape. He looked up from his desk, flashed her a smile, and her knees went weak. She hadn't felt like this since her teenage years, and the feeling threw her off balance. Regain your composure and be professional, she scolded herself. Don't forget to breathe, Lexi. Her face flushed as she stepped forward to introduce herself. Miss Danforth, it's nice to finally meet you, Jake said, extending his hand. It is Miss, correct? Uh-huh, Lexi managed, mentally kicking herself for her lack of professionalism. She took a deep breath, shaking his hand. The moment their hands touched, tingles shot through her and she stammered, Yes, it's Miss. Jake motioned for her to sit. Call me Jake. No need for formalities here. Lexi carefully lowered herself into the chair, worried her legs might give out. She took another breath, trying to remember why she was there in the first place. What can I do for you, Miss Danforth? Looking to start an insurance policy? Jake asked. No, actually, Lexi stammered. her mind a blank. The questions she'd prepared earlier had completely vanished. I'm helping Constable Ballard with an investigation. Jake nodded. Yes, I've heard about that. News travels fast around here, Lexi said, grateful to have found her voice again. I work for him. He's got a lot on his plate and asked me to help with some of the legwork. I've seen you in the office from the diner across the street, Jake said, smiling again. Lexi's heart skipped another beat. He had noticed her? Had he been watching her the same way she'd been watching him? She felt like a giddy teenager again. Focus, Lexi. Get this over with. Well, as you've probably heard, an elderly couple has gone missing, and I was wondering if they had a life insurance policy. Yes, they do, Jake said simply. Lexi waited for more, but when nothing else came, she realized she'd have to pry the information out of him. Is it a large policy? Is there a beneficiary? Yes, he answered, again offering no additional details. Lexi frowned. It was clear Jake wasn't going to offer anything unless she asked specific questions. Can you tell me who the beneficiary is? No. He stood up and walked around to the edge of his desk, leaning against it. I have confidentiality laws to follow. Without a court order, I can't release any information. Lexi was about to protest when he threw her off with a question of his own. Would you like to have dinner with me? She blinked, completely caught off guard. How could he be thinking about a dinner date right now? Her nerves were already frazzled, and the thought of spending an entire evening with him was overwhelming. Mr. Donovan, I don't think this is the right time to plan a date. Jake straightened, his tall frame towering over her. Lexi sat there, staring up at him, unsure of whether she should stand as well. Was he about to kick her out? Let me show you out, Miss Danforth, he said, confirming her suspicion. Lexi stood, feeling flustered. So much for getting any useful information from him. As she headed toward the door, she decided to ask one last question. Someone mentioned seeing the Swansons in your office last week. Can you tell me about that? They were just updating some things, Jake said as he walked toward the door, holding it open for her. Lexi glanced back at his desk and noticed a file sitting there with the Swansons' name on it. You don't find it odd that they've disappeared? Jake paused and looked at her. Yes, I do. I think it's terrible. But I'm just an insurance guy. It's not my job to keep tabs on every client. You're rather callous about it, Lexi said, narrowing her eyes. I have work to do, Jake replied. Bring me a court order and I'll gladly share what I can. A court order could take days since no immediate family has reported them missing, Lexi said as she walked toward the door. Jake gave a half-hearted shrug. If it makes you feel better, their insurance doesn't pay unless they're deceased. Lexi shot him a glare. No, that doesn't make me feel any better. Jake's smile returned, disarming her once again. Are you sure you won't have dinner with me? His smile was so infectious that Lexi felt her resolve weaken for a moment. She now understood why the waitress at the diner always seemed so happy when he was around. Lexi quickly pulled herself together and headed for the exit before she lost her composure completely. Thanks for your time, she said over her shoulder as she hurried past the receptionist's desk and out the door. Chapter 5. Lexi went home that night feeling completely annoyed. The peaceful evening she'd enjoyed with Peyton and Paisley the night before now seemed like a distant memory. As she pulled into the driveway, she noticed the lights were on in the house. Grams must be home. It was unusual for her to be in before dark. She was so active for her age and rarely home early. The sun was setting behind the old Victorian house, casting a soft glow over its familiar facade. Dragging herself up the steps and onto the porch, Lexi opened the front door and was instantly greeted by the comforting aroma of Graham's cooking. The smell brought back memories of being 11 years old when Grams would make all her favorite dishes. Kicking off her shoes, Lexi let her nose lead her to the kitchen where Grams was talking to herself, seemingly restless. Considering 2 of her close friends were missing, it made sense. It smells amazing in here, Grams, Lexi said. Grams turned around, startled. Oh dear. She placed a hand on her chest. You scared me. I didn't hear you come in. Maybe that's because you were talking to yourself, Lexi teased. Grams waved a hand toward the back door. I wasn't talking to myself. I was talking to Baxter. Lexi glanced up and saw Baxter, the family's pet crow, perched next to his door by the back entrance. Hey, Baxter, how's life treating you today? She asked, and the crow let out a caw in response. Lexi turned back to Grams. Sorry, I should have checked before assuming. Grams chuckled. Well, I do talk to myself sometimes, but don't worry. I'm not losing my marbles just yet. Lexi moved toward the cupboard to grab the dishes, ready to set the table, but Grams stopped her. No, dear. Let's use the good china tonight, she said, pointing to the cabinet where the family's heirloom set was kept. Lexi hesitated. Are you sure, Grams? We never use those. Grams gave her a sad smile. Yes, I'm sure. Life's too short not to use the best dishes more often. Lexi set the table with the delicate china, careful not to chip anything. She poured them each a glass of white wine, even though she had no idea what they'd be eating. Grams always said white wine was good with anything. When Grams brought the food over, a hearty spread of roast, meatloaf, gravy, mashed potatoes, and her famous biscuits, Lexi knew she was going to overeat. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, but eventually Lexi reached out and touched Grams' arm gently. How are you holding up, Grams? Grams put down her fork and sighed. I'm doing okay, sweetheart. It's just been a long time since anything like this has happened here. Is it bringing back memories of Aunt Agatha? Lexi asked softly. A tear welled up in Grams' eye. Yes, it's been 25 years, but I still miss her every day. She wiped her eyes. A lot of the older folks are reliving the memories, too. It's hard on all of us. Just then, Baxter swooped down from his perch and landed on the table. Lexi couldn't help but smile. He seemed to be comforting Grams. Grams broke off a piece of biscuit and offered it to the crow. I'm okay, Baxter. Here, have a little treat. After Baxter returned to his perch, Grams turned back to Lexi. Have you and John found any leads? Lexi shook her head. Not really. Everything's been a dead end. Mr. Copeland doesn't seem to care that the Swansons are missing. He told me to get a court order if we want to search their house. Grams frowned. That man is so cold. You should see the magistrate about that tomorrow. She's a good woman, though she can be tough when it comes to her job. Don't let her intimidate you. I'll keep that in mind, Lexi said, refilling her wine glass. I also stopped by to see Jake Donovan. Oh? Grams asked, raising an eyebrow. What does he have to do with anything? John wanted to check on the Swansons' life insurance. Jake wasn't any more helpful than Copeland, though. He also told me I'd need a court order. Lexi hesitated before adding, he asked me out too. Grams' face lit up. Did he now? When's the big date? I didn't say yes, Lexi replied, rolling her eyes. Why not? Grams pressed, clearly intrigued. Lexi shrugged. I was annoyed. I probably should have accepted, though. He might have been more cooperative if I had. He did have the Swansons' insurance policy sitting right there on his desk. Grams smiled knowingly. I'm sure he'll ask again. Don't worry about it. And when you see Mavis about that court order, I'm sure she'll know exactly what to do. Lexi laughed. She's probably going to wonder why I need so many court orders. I'm sure she's seen it all, Grams said with a grin. She's sharp when it comes to the law. Later that evening, after they had cleaned up the kitchen, Lexi and Grams took their final glasses of wine out to the back porch. A few rabbits hopped around, likely searching for Paisley and her carrots from the night before. Sitting in the quiet, Lexi found herself appreciating the time with Grams. Despite the sadness that seemed to linger around her lately, Grams remained as lively as ever. The years had been kind to her, and even with everything going on, she seemed to stay busy, almost as if she was trying to outrun the memories. Lexi glanced over and noticed Grams staring at the full moon, whispering softly. It was something Lexi vaguely remembered from her childhood. grams whispering to the moon. She couldn't remember if she'd ever asked why she did it, but tonight didn't feel like the right time to ask. So instead, Lexi simply sat in silence, staring up at the moon alongside her.